We are currently in the second and final VCT group stage of the year. The top 12 teams from North America are battling it out every weekend to qualify for the illustrious Masters event. But no matter how much hype we get from weekly Valorants with top competition playing and a nice structure, one thing still sticks out on my mind. It's only 12 teams. Valorant is the fastest growing esports scene in the world. Is RIOT cutting it off a little too early? The inorganic growth of an esports scene is something that's really foreign to me. I actually don't come from the League of Legends or CS scene. I mainly come from the Super Smash Bros. Melee scene, where basically everything lives and dies by the community. There's no developer support, and any developer support that we get usually is not very good.
Nintendo sponsored EVO Japan, one of the biggest Super Smash Bros. Tournaments in Japan, and instead of giving them the typical $10,000 or $20,000 prize pool, they gave the winner a controller.
So having RIOT control the whole entity that is Valorant and its competitive scene is very worrying to me. Big esports only wants one thing. But RIOT recently released their plans for the 2023 VCT season, and I want to actually take a look, deep dive, and figure out what exactly it'll look like for next year and try to break it down very simply, how I predict it will actually go, the pros and cons of it, and ultimately, will this change the scene for the better? Because these are some big changes. So let's figure out if RIOT's franchising model is POG or DOG. Welcome back to another episode of Off the Dome. My name is Dominic. I very clearly have moved, and it's very messy, so I'm going to be playing around with this for a bit. But welcome back to Off the Dome. Subscribe.
If you remember back to last year, the 2021 VCT system was horrendous. The bracket system was consistently changing and there was no consistency of teams at the top. Sentinels was the best, but they only played once every 3 months or so because they just kept qualifying for everything. There was no consistent power ranking and only a few teams were able to keep afloat the entire year. But this year's VCT system, we saw a ton of improvements. I actually planned to make this video a long time ago, commenting and reflecting on the improved system and how it could be improved further in the future. Instead of one-off tournaments with open brackets, closed brackets, and qualifying for Masters, they had open brackets lead to smaller group pools so we can see all the pro teams play each other. This semi-open system allowed for a consistent high-level play, but also allowed rooms for a healthy rotation of teams to keep the competition fresh. Although it doesn't provide sustainability for top teams looking to build up a roster, and instead forcing teams to have a win-at-all-cost mentality, it's still an improvement from last year. But it also speaks to the direction that the VCT is heading.
Going into the 2023 season, RIOT has finally released their plan, their master plan on scaring all the Tier 2 players with lightning effects. Franchising. But what exactly is franchising and what is its place in the broader esports scene?
For a long time in the Wild West days of esports, open bracket tournaments were king. Any team could enter, and the only way to gain relevance in the scene was to win. It was through this model that we found some of the most storied modern esports organizations. Teams like TSM, Liquid, Fnatic, Cloud9, G2, and T1 were all teams that at one point were dominating the scene. But as the esports scene grew bigger, more money was entering the pot. More money to the winners, more money to better players, and esports became a business much like a lot of traditional sports. And with a healthy tier 2 scene, top teams need to have a consistent rotation of good players to stay at the top. And God forbid an unsigned free agent team upset a major organization and take their spot in relevance. There was no security for people trying to make their livelihoods in esports. And as a whole, that's not good for the scene. So franchising was brought into modern esports. It was actually RIOT to implement one of the first successful franchising models. Successful. Teams could pay $10 million for one of 10 slots in the NALCS. Paying this franchising fee would not only help RIOT run their prestigious tournaments, but RIOT would ensure the constant relevance and financial security for each of the 10 teams. For players of those 10 teams, they were eaten well. Franchising allowed for bigger contracts and figureheads in the scene. But if you zoom out a bit, franchising elevated the top so far away that the tier 2 scenes below them became a wasteland, especially in North America. There are still a few players grinding their way up the ladder, but without a new rotation of teams needing to elevate their game and import players taking a lot of domestic player spots, there are not as many players that can rise through the ranks, or at least get to the level that the pro players are at. The average salary of an LCS player is $400,000 a year, while a lot of the tier 2 scene are unsigned rosters. Again, it's not that there aren't players playing in the tier 2 scene, but they have to grind for years to just get an opportunity at the top. Fast forward a few years and Riot Game has become Riot Games, releasing VALORANT. Since the beginning of the competitive scene, there has been a healthy rotation of players. As the community is still innovating in how to maximize the game's internal systems, the top teams are never really stagnant. Sure, you have teams like Sentinels being ever dominant in 2021, but they've fallen off and had to regain and slowly rise through the ranks back in 2022. And even now, 2 years into the game, at the top level, it's still not stagnant. We have reoccurring teams for sure, but open qualifiers have seen new teams get into the rotations like Ghost Gaming and this is the benefit of an open bracket system, and it allows teams to earn their spot based off of merit instead of just owning a slot. It is the best for viewer experience because it forces your team to stay competitive by making roster changes and keeping their playbooks fresh instead of tanking until the next season. Let me briefly explain Riot's 2023 VCT format from top to bottom. Tier 1 will be the same as it was before. Teams from all over the world will come together for big Masters events throughout the year and champions at the end of the year. I imagine the top 12 to 16 teams from all around the world will need to qualify to get there. This aspect of big tournaments are here to stay, so for the super casual viewer, things won't really change for you. Tier 2 is where it starts to get interesting. Instead of 8 major regions around the world with their own sorts of league, Riot's actually shaving this down to only 3 major international leagues, comprised of 3 splits around the world. The first region is going to be the North American, Brazil, and LATAM regions making up one big chunk. The next is EU, Russia, and the MENA making up another chunk, and finally Asia, APAC, and Australia will make up the third. Each league will be comprised of 8 to 10 partnered esports organizations that will play to qualify for these big S-tier events like Masters and Champions. Partnered esports organizations or franchisees will actually not need to pay for a slot, which is interesting, but instead will be selected by Riot themselves. This is the most interesting part, so I'll come back to this later. The third tier of competition is outlined with Game Changers events, third-party tournaments, and something called the Domestic League. I imagine that Game Changers events will not really change as they are right now, and I'm planning to talk about them more in the future, so stay tuned for that. And third-party tournaments will likely fade even more into the background than they are right now. With Riot's improved internal structure, it's looking tough for them. And finally, there's the Domestic League, a way to find better talent, domestically I guess. 8 to 10 teams from smaller segmented regions will continue to compete on a weekly league structure. Since the Tier 1 teams will be competing internationally, this will kind of be the place for Tier 2 teams to work on their game. The bottom floor of competition is competitive, but not the current terrible competitive queue that we have right now, but the new game mode they're working on to encourage players to band together and compete against other teams. I imagine this to be similar to the League Clash system, and overall will guide players in a path to professional play. This is the basic premise of the 2023 VCT system, and we definitely need the full picture before we start critiquing it.
VALORANT is the fastest growing esports scene in the world. It's not up to the same point as League of Legends or CSGO right now, but it's definitely climbing its way up there. These games and scenes have been out for 10 plus years. VALORANT is entering its franchising phase only 3 years into its competitive development. I'm going to go through the pros and cons of each to sort of weigh it to see whether it's overall good or bad.
There's no doubt that these changes will reverberate throughout the entire VALORANT ecosystem, and as such, we should look at the changes with different lenses. As a fan of VALORANT and the VALORANT competitive scene, while these changes may be different, I think they're overall good for the viewer experience. While the team you may have been supporting throughout the past couple years may not make the international or domestic league, there will be a consistent set of teams competing at the top instead of asking, hey, what are my boys going to play next? This will also make it much easier for new viewers to get into VALORANT, as you can easily explain what matches are happening when, instead of needing to stay up to date with the changing tournament formats. The storylines will be better and we'll see the play be elevated in that sense. For an organization, this is also a blessing, or a curse I guess. Despite how well known esports teams are in the space, they are hanging on by a thread. Most teams operate at a loss, especially as the cost of players inflates, success varies, and prize pools are relatively small. So franchising offers a consistent position in the spotlight for teams. They can get sponsorships, they can get new deals, it's much better for them. Teams like TSM, Cloud9, 100 Thieves are only able to gain relevance because of their consistent involvement in major esports like League of Legends. Now, for fringe teams that can't compete at the highest levels or didn't make the cut for the international or domestic leagues, they're fucked. Your selection to be a partner with Riot is not even necessarily based off their success. As Riot outlined, their partners will be decided based off of building great esports experiences, developing players, and can meaningfully contribute to the long-term growth of Valorant. LG recently announced that they'll be closing their doors in Valorant, likely due to their lack of inclusion in one of these major leagues. Keep in mind, LG is a major organization in the TAC shooter space, a top 5 team in North America right now as well. Since there are only 8 to 10 teams in the International League, split amongst North America, Brazil, and LATAM, that means maybe 4 to 6 North American teams will be represented at the top level. We will only see 4 to 6 of Sentinels, C9, Optic, XSET, NRG, LG, TSM, V1, Ghost, The Guard, 100 Thieves, EG, Genji, FaZe, and you get the point. There is a lot of teams at the top of Valorant. There are a lot of organizations that have spent the past few years trying to break in or have broken out in Valorant, but they will just get left in the dust if they're excluded from the professional scene. Now that's tough, but even worse off than that are players. Now again, there will be some players that will be eating. Players at the top, Optic, Sentinels are almost certainly a lock for the top, but players below that are going to struggle. Similar to the problems outlined with franchising, restricting the openness of play means that fewer players will be able to compete at the top level. Similar to League of Legends, players will have an incredibly tough time making it to the top. We've been introduced to so many up-and-coming players over the past couple years, and their path to pro has just been shut down. But not all hope is lost. Unlike the league circuit, Valorant will have 2 top leagues, the domestic and the international league. While one is certainly more prestigious than the other, the domestic league will still have a place for premier local talent to blossom. Additionally, although Riot Games hasn't indicated a way to promote from the domestic league to the international league, they haven't said anything against it. Especially with the decision to forego any franchising fees, I would say it's still not out of the question for there to be some sort of promotion involved in the scene. I think there will still be ways for players to move up and down the rankings, but it will be just exponentially difficult. Now, I will be the first to admit my own biases upon this analysis. I'm coming from the perspective of a fan of the game. I have not had direct experience as a player or part of an organization, so I lack the additional nuance that only an expert can provide in those areas. I'm just here to give you the basic analysis so you can go on to better understand the opinions of others in the scene as they're giving it. Now, if you have your own ideas on the format, please comment down below or join my Discord if you want to come and chat about it. If you think I'm wrong and you think I'm dog shit stupid, tell me why. I'm always down to listen. My final verdict is this though. As a player, keep grinding. While it'll be much more difficult to make it to the top, it's still not impossible. There will be opportunities for you to compete, and if you have the passion for competition, teams are always looking to improve, so strut your stuff and best luck in the future. As an organization, it will take more than just good results to make it to this upper echelon. Build the proper infrastructure for success, because you'd be surprised that some teams just don't have it. For Riot Games, please consider a promotion relegation system in and out of both the domestic and international leagues. This would keep play from being stagnant and would also give players and teams motivation that there's a way to get to the top without just getting lucky and getting picked up. And finally, as a fan of Valorant, just keep watching because there's a lot of shit going on behind the curtains that you don't have to deal with. And as always, thank you for watching.
Thank you very much for watching. I know this is a little bit different from a usual video, but I've been moving, I've been really busy, and I've been sort of out of it recently, so hopefully this will get me back in the swing of things. I wrote the script a little bit ago, so I had to retool it as new information kind of came out. But overall, thank you. If you want to check me out on Twitter, at QuickDome, if you want to check me out on Discord, I guess, you can check me out there. Subscribe if you can, that's awesome. Hopefully I'll be releasing more videos soon. I say that every single time, and I never do. But maybe one of these weeks, I will. Anyways, take it easy, everyone. Peace.